Hi, this is Tim Tucker from United Way, Central Ohio Tax Time Training. This is part 3 in our series on the Ohio School District Income Tax. In this video, we will cover part year residency for the traditional school district tax base. In this video, we will complete a 2025 SD100 for a part year resident of a traditional taxing school district. Included in that, we will show you the importance of entering every school district that the taxpayer lived in during the year. We'll understand the default prorating method that taxpayer uses in coming up with the amount of school district taxable income for this part year resident. And we'll also discuss alternate ways to come up with the part year school district taxable income when the default method is not appropriate. Line 22 of the SD100 is the traditional school district tax base, and that's based on the portion of the MAGI minus exemptions received while that taxpayer is a resident of that school district. The Ohio IT 1040 instructions provide some guidance on making that calculation. First of all, they specify that Ohio law does not specify exactly how it's calculated. And if you can definitely pinpoint the amount of income received during the time that the resident lived in that school district, you should do so. It may not be possible, in which case you should prorate your income and deductions based on how long you resided in that district. So we know that sometimes that can be difficult to do, to get the exact amount, because you may get incomes at different times of the year. You may have different paying jobs at different times of the year. What we're going to do in this video, we're going to give an example using the prorated method, and then we're going to drill down a little bit more deeply to show how we can get a more accurate and in some cases a fair value to use for the taxable income. Here we can see the high-level flow of information on the SD100. Line 5 is the modified adjusted gross income minus exemptions. And in going from line 5 to line 22 in the traditional tax base section, there has to be a translation to calculate the amount of line 5 received while a resident of the school district. So we'll be focusing on that on the next few slides. These are the general steps that we'll follow when doing a part year SD100 for a traditional school district tax. Step 1, we'll prepare the federal and Ohio return as normal, and you already know how to do this, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. As part of this step, and actually during the intake interview, you will identify all the school districts where the taxpayer resided and the beginning and end dates of the residency. In step 2, we'll add the SD100 to the return, and we will include all the school districts that were identified in step 1. Each of these school districts will be entered as a part year residency with the appropriate start and stop dates. When we do this, TaxSlayer will automatically make a prorated calculation for line 22, which is based on line 5 times the prorated amount of time that the taxpayer spent in that school district. And in step 3, what we'll do is exit the Ohio return, look for errors, and we'll generate a PDF and look at the SD100, line 22, and the rest of the SD100, see if it looks correct and sane. And this is also the time where you can make a judgment call as to whether the calculated prorated value is appropriate or whether you want to dig a little bit deeper and refine that. Let's take a look at the following example. Our taxpayer is John Brown. John lived in Columbus, which is a non-taxing school district, for the first 8 months of the year. John then moved to Reynoldsburg for the last 4 months of the year. Reynoldsburg is a taxing school district. John had $30,000 in W-2 wages for a job that he worked for the first 10 months of the year. He also won $5,000 from an online sports betting in March, which is when he was living in Columbus. Now, the federal AGI for John will be $35,000, which is his $30,000 W-2 wages plus the $5,000 gambling winnings. So let's say how this plays out when we create the SD100. And we know that by default, TaxSlayer is going to calculate the Reynoldsburg taxable school district base by prorating the income by approximately 4/12, 4 months of the 12 months when he was living in Reynoldsburg. I have already completed step one and prepared the federal and Ohio returns as normal. Nothing special about that, so I'm not going to go through that. Next, we will go through step two in tax layer and add the ST100 to the return and include all the school districts identified in step one, which is Columbus and Reynoldsburg. We will now enter the ST100 return and include all the school districts identified in step one. I have already created the return with the W-2 and the gambling income. You can see the AGI is $35,000. So now I'll go to the state section and we will go into localities, which is where the ST100 is, and begin. Only one choice here, which is resident. I'm not sure why they have that, but you have to check that box. So the county lived in for a majority of 2025. We know that was Franklin. And here's where we enter the school district information. So there's two school districts we have to enter, Columbus and Reynoldsburg. So we will enter Columbus first, Franklin and Columbus City School District. And for Columbus, the residency status was part year. And we know that he lived in Columbus from 1/1/2025 to the end of August. And that's all we need to enter there. Just ignore everything else below that. Nothing else we need to do here. So we're going to hit continue. And we're going to add another school district because he also lived in Reynoldsburg. So we know that the county was Franklin. School district was Reynoldsburg. The school district, the residency status is again part year. And Reynoldsburg, he lived from 9/1/2025 until the end of the year, 12/31/2025. So we'll continue. And that is all we need to do for now. So we're going to back out of this until we're all the way back into the federal return. It takes a number of clicks. And I'm going to do one more continue because if there were some error, which I'll show later, it would pop up. It wouldn't pop up until you hit continue. For step three, we exit the Ohio return and generate the PDF. We'll take a look at the ST100, line 22, and the rest and see if everything looks okay. Let's go to the PDF of the return to see what tax layer generated for the ST100. So we will go to the state section and click on the printer icon here. This will print just the Ohio return and make it a little bit quicker rather than generating the entire return. Scroll down to the SD100, make it a little bigger. So we can see here that it's got the two school districts that we entered that John Brown lived in, the number of days in each school district based on the dates that we entered. It also calculates something called the residency factor, which is basically the fraction of days of the year that John Brown lived in each of these school districts. And then we can see line 5 is the Magi minus exemptions. That's 32,600. This is the starting point in which tax layer will then prorate that for the amount of income that should be taxed in Reynoldsburg. So it's basically the Reynoldsburg residency factor times this number 32,600, which is the starting point in line 22 for how Reynoldsburg will tax this. And this is the percentage that for the Reynoldsburg taxes. So it ends up showing a total of $54 owed in Reynoldsburg school district tax. So that carries back to the ST100, and that's the total amount due. So is the SD 100 line 22 income that TaxSlayer came up with fair in this case? TaxSlayer populated this line with $10,895, which is the prorating it came up with based on the time in Reynoldsburg, which is about 4/12. It's probably not fair because we know the income was not earned equally throughout the year. So how can we come up with a more fair line 22 taxable income? So Ohio law doesn't specify how exactly this should be done. We're going to demonstrate one method that can be used for this specific case, and our Ohio School District FAQ does provide some more details and other examples for this. So we're going to use SD 100 line 5, the 32,600 Magi minus exemptions as our starting point. We know that the gambling winnings, the $5,000, was realized while John Brown was living in Columbus, so that shouldn't be taxable by Reynoldsburg. So we're going to start by subtracting that $5,000 out, and that leaves us with 20,600. So we know that John's remaining income, the W-2 income, was earned over a period of 10 months, and 8 of those months were while he was in Columbus, and 2 of those were in Reynoldsburg. So we're going to allocate 2/10 of the 27,600 to Reynoldsburg, and that comes out to 5520. So we would like 5520 to be the number that appears on SD 100 line 22. So how can we force line 22 to be this new value rather than the default value that TaxSlayer uses? Well, let's go jump into TaxSlayer and see how this is done. We are back in TaxSlayer. Let's go ahead and edit the SD100 and see if we can override that default value. You can see right now the amount owed is $54 for the school district. So we will go into localities, SD100, edit. We're going to edit the school district information for Reynoldsburg. We'll edit. And down here, we're going to go into the school district taxable income, and we're going to enter a value which will override the default value that TaxSlayer calculates. So here we're going to put our 5520. And there's a nice description here of how this works in the blue box. We'll hit continue. One thing to point out here, this school district taxable income and earned income tax base are kind of both where you would make adjustments. The school district taxable income should really be titled traditional school district taxable income. I'm not sure why they don't put that label there. They make it clear for the earned income tax base. At any rate, we'll continue back, exit the Ohio return, keep on clicking until we're out of the Ohio return. And you can see that the school district tax has now dropped to $28. So we did something, and I'm going to generate a PDF of the return. Let's take a look, see what that looks like. Go down to the SD100. Nothing changes up here in the residency factor part. The change is going to take place in the traditional tax base schedule. Line 22, we can see it is 5520, and so that's going to be what Reynoldsburg applies the 0.05% tax to. So that results in $28. One thing to point out, this calculation of a that overrides the default value can work both ways, and by that I mean you may have a situation where using the default prorated method ends up cheating the state out of some money if you flip around the way the income was received by the taxpayer. So just something to keep in mind when you are using the override and trying to figure out a different way other than the default prorated method that TaxSlayer uses. I mentioned earlier that it's important that when you're entering the SD100, you have to enter every school district you've lived in during the year, and the total number of days has to add up to 365, otherwise you'll run into a problem. So I deliberately introduced an error by changing my residency dates in Columbus to leave out the last day in August. You can see instead of 8/31, I've got 8/30. And So when I save that and exit out of the Ohio return, it will pop up with an error message like this, a state validation error, and it'll typically give you a description. In this case, it says that my total number of days is 364, so it doesn't equal a full year. So I need to go back and correct that. When we're doing something other than the default, it's a good idea to include a preparer's note as a reminder to the taxpayer what was done, and for the quality reviewer, and for anybody in the future who needs to look at this return and try to recreate what we did. So in this case, I will go to the federal section. And under federal, I will click under miscellaneous forms. And under miscellaneous, I will click on explanations and add a preparer's note. And I will title it SD 100 explanation. And for the note, I will put something like this, just a few words to give somebody an idea of what we did when we were overriding the default tax layer prorated income for the school district. And then when I generate a PDF of the return, we will see the preparer's notes as part of the package. So I will go ahead and do that so we can take a look. You can see this preparer's notes listed here, which is looks like it's right before the Ohio return. Yeah, here it is. And just some parting thoughts as we wrap up. Part year residency ST100s must include entries for all the residences where the taxpayer lived during the year, and the total days have to add up to a full year. The default prorated value that TaxLayer calculates for ST100 line 22 may not be fair. There are various ways that we can calculate a more fair and accurate part year residency tax base. Our Ohio Tax Adders FAQ has some more details on this. And it's a good idea to add a descriptive preparer's note to the return as a record of any assumptions and calculations that we made that may not be obvious on the return. Thanks for watching part 3 of this video. Please continue on with parts 4 and beyond for more exciting school district tax information. Links to our FAQs and useful websites will be posted in the description below the video. If you have questions or comments, feel free to leave me a comment on the YouTube channel, or ping me on Slack, or send email to me at timmythetaxman@gmail.com.